Okay, this is going to be partially thoughts and observations. Not really a secret, Pathfinder isn't in the best spot unless you're playing Chaos, which seems counter to what they're trying to do from their problem statement. So there's probably some level of discontent about Pathfinder from the players, and I imagine also at GGG. Pathfinder's identity of being based around flasks means that Pathfinder, from a design perspective, is completely fucked. It's like Deadeye but worse, right? If you buff all the bows, you buff all the Deadeyes. Because a lot of Deadeyes use bows. You buff wands, you buff Deadeyes. But it's only 2 items. And not everybody has a bow or wand. With Pathfinder, if you change all the flasks, well, everybody has 5 flasks. Well, sometimes less, but usually they have 5 flasks. But it has a massive effect on Pathfinder, right? So changing a mod here or there on Pathfinder has a huge effect. And recently they reworked all the flasks. And what ended up happening was that sustaining your flasks became super easy. Right? It went from being a pain to being super easy. Flask piano was gone. You had triggering flasks. Flasks had much higher durations. You had the flask charges on when being hit. There were all of these things that were awesome for flask systems. If you were a zoomer, flask sustain was awesome. But that's also part of the issue that happened at that point with Pathfinder, because when they made flask sustain super easy, they brought down the benefits relative to the other classes, like that gap around flask became smaller. So Pathfinder lost some power and other classes gained some power. They also added a lot more flask effect on the tree, which happened around the same time. And again, that's another case where, something that was more unique to Pathfinder became less unique to Pathfinder and it ended up on the tree. A lot of the things Pathfinder does ended up on the tree, except for the poison stuff and the chaos stuff. Except for the chaos conversion, the 40%, you can find that on the tree too. So there's some challenges around there. And it's going to be really hard to balance Pathfinder and keep Pathfinder balanced if you also make changes to flasks. And that is in a way a self-inflicted problem, right? By giving Pathfinder all of this flask effect and all of these things related to flasks, and by basing the whole identity around flasks, this is self-inflicted. So let's talk about pre-flask changes, right? Why would you play Pathfinder? Well, a couple of reasons. One, you got access to a lot of power because your flasks were always up. Wasn't really something other classes had. Even if you overflasked, your flasks probably were always up. Like you could just slam the keyword, popsicle stick slam, do whatever, flask macro if you were being fancy. Of course, that would be against terms of service, so I would never recommend you do that. But back in those days, that's what people were doing. I just hit my keys. I still have to put my life flask and the mana flask in the same spot because muscle memory. I also was too lazy to get the macro working right. Anyway, so we have that period, and during that period, the Pathfinder ability to overflask was awesome. Getting rid of ailments was pretty tedious. You got a lot of benefit from being a Pathfinder. Now, you also got rid of ailments via flasks, right? You became immune to ailments via your flasks. That's changed as well. So let's talk about flasks and power. And for this, we're going to use paint. And this is probably going to look awful. But what's going to happen is if we have power and we have like investment, right? So we have power. And can we make this bigger? Can we make this bigger? Awesome. And then we have investment. Well, when you get more flash charges, right? Your flasks are not up all the time. You know, duration, increased flash charges gained, all of these things. You invest a little bit into the Ascendancy, you invest a bit into the class, you get a lot of power out of that, right? But what happens is that as soon as your flasks are up 100% of the time, more flash charges gained doesn't really do a whole lot, right? You get into this linear range. And then they had this flash charges gained whenever you're hit, and some of these things. And what was happening is more investment would actually get you to a higher level, and then it would level out again. So initially you're getting to the point where all your flasks are up. You get a little bit of an improvement just because of flask effect. Then once your flasks are triggering fast enough to work with your Ascendancy nodes, like Master Surgeon, removing bleed, removing corrupting blood, giving you life recovery, and what was the other guy? Master Alchemist, removing elemental ailments in a meaningfully fast way, right? If you remove all your elemental ailments every other hit, that's good enough to deal with shock. Every fifth hit, shock's gonna kill you, right? That's kind of the difference between then and now. But that's why you got to the point where, like, hey, more investment, you start to get to the point where you get these Ascendancy nodes triggering, you have all these benefits, and then after a while, it falls off very rapidly again as to how much power you gain from your investment. Now, what happened in the new patch, and we'll go with blue. Oh, well, a moment. I need to start a new line. What happened in the new patch is that they really reduced this payoff, right? It's more like this. We'll go purple, and then you get into this linear range again. So the having a lot of investment in flasks, your payout is much lower, and this is 3.19 versus 3.18. Now, the other thing that happened is everybody else crept up because flash sustain was much easier, and as a Pathfinder, you don't really have to put in a lot of effort to get to the point where you're investing. Right? Most Pathfinder builds, you're ending up comfortably in this flat range just because of how easy it is to sustain flasks for everyone, let alone with a Pathfinder with passive flask charges gained, more passive flask charges gained on the tree, flask effect duration, increased flask charges gained, like all of these things, you're already in this range, right? So there's a fair amount of investment you do that doesn't really pay off. So this is kind of the way things are laid out. And in the past, what happened, prior to in the olden days, if you will, prior to these flask reworks and everything else, a Pathfinder Ascendancy at the end of acts put you around here. Right, you got a lot of payoff because you were able to sustain flasks in ways that other classes couldn't. You didn't really have over-sustaining of flasks be nearly as big of an issue. Whereas now it's very easy to get into the over-sustain range, which is this flat power part. Like you have more investment than you need, you're over-sustaining. So that's kind of what's going on there. Right, so this would be like 3.10. Just grabbing a number. And then this is where we're at with 3.19. Really? Magical tool. Anyway, so we're in this uncomfortable spot where we are kind of not getting the bang for our buck. And solving this is going to be hard, right? And part of the reason of that is the identity that they created for Pathfinder and the fact that all the other classes seem to use flasks as well, right? Unlike Deadeye with bows, a lot of other classes don't use bows, so it's much easier to solve the Deadeye problem than to solve the Pathfinder problem. Okay, so now the topic for the video. Should you be playing Pathfinder or should you be playing Ascendant? So on Pathfinder, the nodes that I find very useful are Nature's Boon. Now this is going to reduce the 6% reduced elemental damage taken. But you gain 3 flask charges every 3 seconds, which is the majority of what you want. And 20% chance for flasks you use not to consume charges, which is a nice to have. But unless we can stack this high enough that it really we get to the non-linear returns, which right now I don't think we can, or my opinion is we can't get there, this isn't that exciting. So, and then you get, of course, increased flash charges gained. Once you get 3 flash charges every 3 seconds, that is so many charges with the new durations on flasks that this sustains pretty close to already. Like having more of increased flash charges gain is kind of like wasted. Similar to increased duration, it doesn't really, you almost don't need it. But these two nodes, Nature's Adrenaline, Nature's Boon, are very popular. And then for the people who play Chaos, they use Master Toxicist and Nature's Reprisal, which are awesome nodes. The Chaos part of the tree, there's stuff to be done. Yeah, there's a unique that you can use, but this has a thing going for it. This has sort of a thing going for it. The 40% is awkward. It'd be nice if it was 60% so you can get to 100%, but whatever. And then we have Master Surgeon. Master Surgeon, super popular. Pretty much everybody in the gauntlet is using it for the survival ability. Without the over-flasking, right? It's not as interesting to remove bleeding, remove corrupting blood. Right, you have to play Flask Piano to actively remove these things, and reactively, as you get affected by bleed or corrupting blood, or even worse, elemental ailments. And telling when those things are in effect isn't necessarily easy. It's like one icon out of like 15 on your screen. Good luck catching that in time before it blows you up. Now, this was really useful when we could get flask charges so rapidly that flasks were popping all the time, right? Then it became quite powerful, and I would say that probably should have been nerfed. The problem is that by nerfing this, and by nerfing Master Alchemists, if you use your flasks, reuse your flasks at the end of a flask effect, these nodes, from a removing ailments perspective, is useless. And if you have to play with 5 keybinds more, like 4 keybinds more than another class, that's a tough sell. Right? Like it's more skills. You have to hit buttons to do stuff. And I'm all for hitting buttons to do stuff. I'm perfectly fine playing a 3-button build, but when you're playing a Pathfinder, you actively have to manage your flask charges if you want to get the most out of these nodes to get pseudo immunity to elemental ailments. And I don't think it's really worth it. But what happens if we don't do Pathfinder and we go Ascendant? So in Ascendant we get 10% movement speed, which is down from 20%, and 10% attack speed, which is down from 15%. So we get, 4/7 of an Ascendancy node there. We get 3 flash charges every 3 seconds. That's exactly the same. The less elemental damage taken is gone. And then we get 15% chance for flasks you use not to consume charges versus 20%. I'd say you probably get 90% of the value of that node. And then you recover 4% of life when you use a flask. So you get probably like half the value of that node. So by taking Pathfinder as an Ascendant, we get half of Master Surgeon, we get 4/7 of Nature's Adrenaline, and we get 90% of Nature's Boon. Right, so we get effectively a good 2 Ascendancy points out of Pathfinder. That is pretty nuts. Right? You get a lot of value compared to what the Pathfinder tree has to offer if you're not going Chaos. If you're going Chaos, you're leaving a lot of value on the table. But if you're not going chaos, Ascendant gives you a lot of the power up here. Yeah, you don't get the increased effect of flasks, but one, you can pick it up on the tree with skill points, which Ascendant gets a lot of skill points. Two, there's a number of flasks that are completely unaffected by this, or they're not scaled efficiently by this. A quartz flask, right? It doesn't really do much to get a few more percent, because the only thing you scale is the 10% spell suppression. Another example of this would be Dodri's elixir. The number of flask charges you have, the number of frenzy charges, power charges, endurance charges is just flat out not scaled by flask effect. It just doesn't work. Onslaught flasks, not scaled by flask effect. Right, there's a lot of things that are just not scaled by flask effect. It is something that you definitely have to test to make sure that it actually works. So any flask that gives you like buffs and things like that, it doesn't really have the bang for the buck that it used to have. Also, as people have pointed out, it's relatively easy to get this stuff on the tree. Veteran Bowyer. I mean, this node really got hit hard with the changes to flasks. We are already over sustaining flasks. 100% increased flask charges gained is just like, great, when mapping, my flasks are always full, always up. But you don't really have a good use for it. And you might think like, well, hey, I'm gonna play Explosive Concoction. Well, first of all, Explosive Concoction is a shitty fireball. That's really hard to scale. Two, second thing is that the damage conversion on the skill is dead. And yes, you get flask charges to sustain your skill and make it a little bit easier as long as you're not bossing. And if you're bossing, then you're just gonna have flask charges, even on Pathfinder. So yeah. Oh yeah, now you have the new curse, which gives you one flask charge every 3 seconds? What? Anyway. The other thing is that these gain a flask on critical strike. This is capped at 10 flask charges a second. There's other ways to get this ability. It does not stack, right? So you can't get to 20 or 30 flask charges a second by stacking this effect multiple times. They're not additive with each other. Anyway, so yeah, if you're going not chaos and you're looking at Pathfinder, and you go anywhere near the Ascendant node anyway, even if you don't, it might just be worth it to go Ascendant and then reroute and take Path of the Ranger. Which is sad. I don't think many other classes are in this position, where you're just kind of staring at it going like, the Ascendant version is as good as the normal Ascendancy, or like, you know, pretty close to in the ballpark. But if you're not going chaos on Pathfinder, I think the Ascendant is super potent. And should they nerf it? I mean, it's not in line with the relationship that other classes have. So you could make the argument that they should. I think that they're better off working on the Pathfinder Ascendancy and doing something more interesting, or having something that is less clicky, if you will, right? You could have a flask-based identity and not do it on the reactive. You could say when your first flask is active, this happens. When your second flask is active, this happens. Right? Like the flask slots can trigger different abilities that can be turned on and off depending on what's going on. Or what kind of flask is in there. Right? You could make it a very interesting flask-based ascendancy. But the way it is structured right now, it's super clicky, and because the ability to sustain flasks is kind of given, like everyone gets it now, it really doesn't add a whole lot. And yeah, it's nice to be able to sustain flask in case you're fighting Cirrus. Granted. But most of the other, a lot of the other bosses have ads. Some of them, of course, don't. But a lot of people tend to do enough damage to not have to worry too much about flask running out. And flask durations are these days super long compared to what they were before. So I'm kind of struggling because, the channel is called Pathfinder Builds. And I'm staring at it and I'm like, it's really hard not to go Ascendant. There's just more bang for the buck. Once you complete your second lab, you are roughly in the same spot as if you completed 3 labs on Pathfinder, which is nuts. So yeah, and then of course you have super nice flexibility to either fix your stats if you need to, or you can, shop around for other nodes or make your pathing more efficient. There's lots of payoffs for being an Ascendant. So I think that this it might be time to go Pathfinder Light or just Pathfinder Better, as the case may be, and play Ascendant instead of Pathfinder, which will be jarring because I'm used to the Pathfinder Ranger lines. I don't really know any of the other lines, unless like I hear them on occasion with a streamer, and I'm like, wow, some of the other characters are assholes. So yeah, I've been kind of happy with the hippie lines from the Ranger, which in general seem to be not too bit of an outlier as compared to the other personalities. Let's put it that way. Yeah, that's pretty much all I want to say. I don't think they can fix this easily. I think that I think that they probably should remove Flask effect from the small nodes to fix this, which is a major change to the class, and put a lot of Flask effect on a node that is more accessible than this. I think that chance to not consume charges is a better stat to put on these small nodes, even though that also is a less effect. And Flask effect, the reason it's really powerful is because you can apply it to reduced and less effect things to scale them up. But balancing around this is a fool's errand. And once you do that, I think that one, it will unlock some of the flasks and the numbers on the flasks not necessarily being very different in the hands of a ranger of in a Pathfinder compared to other ascendancies. And the other thing it should do is, once you do that, is you kind of have more flexibility on designing unique flasks. Right? You're not as worried about what happens when a Pathfinder with that sacrifices, the major ascendancy nodes for just more minor nodes, which I've done. Right? That's what you did when you wanted to get to the point of casting your Val arc in more time than it took for the I don't know what's called, where you can't gain souls. Soul gain prevention to expire. right? So you could just file arc your way through the world. It was pretty fun. But that's like one of those cases where the issue showed up where people could scale a reduce modifier. Now, of course, they've murdered those flasks. Let's be clear. So that's thoroughly dead, but it's dead for everyone now because Pathfinder could potentially abuse it. It's the same reason that they, on Master Alchemist, tell you like you get 20% increased flask effect, or your magic utility flasks, just so we don't paint ourselves in a corner, right? And that's something they also did with the Timeless Jewels. With Timeless Jewels, you were able to get increased flask effect. And then they were like, how about just increased flask effect for magic flasks? Right? They've made their life difficult by handing that stat out inside of this Ascendancy. They've made their life easier by handing the stat out on the passive tree now. I think that by removing it from the Ascendancy and making the problem more manageable is going to make balancing the Pathfinder and Flasks much easier. And then the question is, how do you make a identity for Pathfinder? Personally, I would tie to the Flasks. Right? Like, if your first Flask gives you elemental resists, you get penetration equal to a third of the resists provided by your first Flasks. Right? It's or a fifth. A fifth would probably be more balanced. You can get a whole bunch of elemental penetration. And it's still tied to flasks. It rewards people for crafting their flask. It still leaves a lot of those things in there without necessarily creating all of the problems that they have today. Because the reactive abilities, without a way to trigger the flasks when we need to, when we're getting hit, is an issue. And yes, you can just put the trigger on one of your flasks that says, use me whenever I'm bleeding, in which case Master Surgeon triggers and removes the bleed. Awesome. But with bleeding and corrupting blood and all of these abilities, you tend to get hit so frequently, depending on what type of build you're running, that you just burn through all your flask charges and then you're frozen anyway. Because there's no immunity built into this node. There's no immunity built into this node. If it just gave you like 2 seconds immunity, problem gone. 4 seconds immunity, holy shit, that's quality of life. But without any immunities, those nodes don't work well with the changes they've put in. But we'll see, right? I can be wrong, but I think that if you want to play it safe, play Ascendant. If you want to play Chaos, play Pathfinder. But if you're not playing Chaos, I think Ascendant might just be a better deal. And, you know, which other node to take? Well, there's a lot of options. I'm sure one of them will be pretty good for your build. If you're going Elemental, shocks always increase damage by at least 10%. That's pretty nice. Cannot take reflected elemental damage. That's convenient. Exposures you inflict apply an extra -20. Oh, that could be actually really good. Right? And an extra golem. Probably not worth it, but whatever. You can apply an additional curse. That seems like a pretty worthwhile node to pick up too. Everything else might not be very practical. Reduced effect of curses. This damage reduction. Every 4% regenerate 20% of your life. That seems convenient. Shared charges. Alright, well, that doesn't speak to me. Maximum mana. You can do some silly things with mana. 8% of damage taken from mana before life. With the new Mind Over Matter, that's adds together quite nicely. Very easy to get Arcane Surge. penetrate 8% of elemental resistances, right? One of our Ascendancy node gives us 10%, and then 15% of a random element, which is not key to the other random elements that you might be getting, so it's hard to use. 10% chance to create consecrated ground. That seems convenient. You can get that from Flasks though. Again, consecrated ground's not scaled by Flask effect. Nearby enemies take 10% increased elemental damage. Well, I think this is just does more damage than if you were to go Veteran Boyer, most likely. Nearby take 10% increased damage probably is more damage than getting 15% of physical is extra damage of a random element. And yeah, you get 8% penetration instead of 10. You already have enough flash charges. So yeah, I don't know what build you want to play, but if you're looking at it right now, I think Ascendant is going to outclass Pathfinder unless you're using the poison nodes and the chaos nodes, which I understand is completely opposite of the problem they were trying to solve in the manifesto. I think they're still trying to solve the problem. I just don't think they found the right solution.